There has been a lot of discourse regarding fighting games and ease of access as the reason the genre is niche. During its inception in the 90s, the genre was perfect for the arcade era, where players are expected to spend quarters over and learn a game over time. The truth is that this design is archaic, and developers know this. In fact, fighting games have been trying to reinvent themselves for a decade already, adding auto combos, one-button reversals, removing input motions. Have these additions been enough to ease new players into the genre?
Holding back to charge a Sonic, then pressing forward and punch at the same time will
Classic players are the biggest sweats. Period.
I would say kinda, but the stigma of fighting games being too difficult persists, and that being the reason we do not have the amount of players as the other genres, despite having the high average viewership at our big events. I think the issue is a bit more complex than just removing special inputs. MOBAs are renowned for their complexity, same for hero shooters, yet these games remain at the top. I think it's mostly an ego problem because fighting games give you a few excuses when you lose, aka skill issue. While I was making this video, my friend SQ made an excellent breakdown of this. Definitely check out her content. In an attempt to increase their player bases, fighting game developers have been looking to make their games easier to understand. Fighting games are amazing because they are conceptually simple. You hit people until they lose all their health. But reaching that goal is more difficult. Something like getting knockdowns, fishing for punishments, or doing strings on people. Today, I want to discuss how the current biggest fighting game, Street Fighter 6, created a system that allowed players from all backgrounds and skill levels to have a fun time. This video will be more than just a review. I will also be analyzing the human-computer interaction interfaces within the game. Human-computer interaction, or HCI, is a field of computer science that evaluates systems and analyzes how people use computer interfaces of all kinds, from basic things like little buttons on an app to vehicle tools. Street Fighter 6 has what I would call 3 different layers of accessibility, each less visible than the next. The first layer is the obvious accessibility features provided in the menu. These are easy to discover and provide a wide range of features for users with different disabilities, from color blindness to a mode where fully blind people get a proximity indicator. The second is the new and widely criticized system implemented in the game that fundamentally changed the gameplay experience relatively to past Street Fighter titles. Love it or hate it, but modern controls have opened the door to countless people who have had difficulty with game inputs or anti-airing, which are massive barriers of entry into Street Fighter. The third layer is the mechanic which all players interact and is built into Street Fighter 6 core game design. The game helps you access the game, like wow, nice analysis, but we're taking these for granted. I think it's worth making a small tangent before we start with the main core of the video. Melty type Lumina came out in 2021 and was meant to be mostly different experience from its successors. The game was trying to be an entry point to a new generation of players that might come from other Type Moon related IPs. What were their core principles and how are they in practice? Before I dissect Type Lumina, I want to say that I love this game and it has changed my life. I am friends with many of its developers, so I don't want to discredit their work, but I want to be fair and evaluate the game's HCI fundamentals. Melty Type Lumina implemented 3 major changes into the core of its gameplay compared to the rest of the series. It introduced auto combos, added moon skills, which are executed by simple directionals, so no input special moves of sorts, and revamped one of its main mechanics, the shield button. In hindsight, these mechanics are well intended, right? They obviously had a vision, which they confirmed in interviews. Did you know at one point they were going to remove directional inputs as a whole? That's very interesting. Let's dissect this and see the flaws each gameplay change had, which made the game frustrating to new and old players alike, and the countermeasures the team implemented over the years that alleviated some issues. The auto combo, or rapid beat, is unfortunately the most intrusive and noticeable iteration of an auto combo system I've seen in a fighting game. It's so intrusive that it actively makes the game more difficult, adding a lot of mental stack while at offensive positions like combos or block strings. Melty auto combo is triggered when you press a button that you have already pressed in your chain. For those who don't play Melty, in this game you are able to go from a heavy attack to a weaker button named reverse beat, and you're not allowed to press a button you already pressed unless you go back into a neutral state. There is an exception with light normals in this case, with a caveat we will visit later. Pressing a button you already used in your chain will give you a character's unique auto combo normal. This button can only be cancelled with special moves or into the final part of the auto combo. The final part of the auto combo is a launcher that can only be cancelled into specials. For most of the characters, it's a copy of their 3C, their universal launcher. This is already very difficult for new players to understand. Beginners often struggle at remembering what buttons they had already pressed in their chain and are punished by double tapping a button, a very common mistake to make at entry levels. Second, the auto combo normals are very unsafe on block, and because you sometimes get them by accident, new players may not be prepared to cancel into a special. Third, and most confusingly, some buttons have built-in follow-ups that are triggered by, you guessed it, pressing the same button again. This won't trigger the auto combo system unless you press a button you already pressed. In this example, Alco cannot press her auto combo button from 2C unless you press something like 2B again. This example illustrates how convoluted this system is to new players. At launch, most players had complaints about the auto combo system as it felt like it forced itself into players and came out in places where the user did not want it. This meant that users were making slips, which in HCI we define as when someone knows what they want to do and how to do it, but they're unable to execute their desired outcome way too often. Lumina's developers attempted to address these issues in August 2022. In this patch, players were now able to select whether they wanted the original system, having the auto combo normal bound to the AB input, not having an auto combo button at all, or just removing the air auto combo. This sounds like a great solution, but again, there are some flaws. First of all, the third option is actually a beginner's trap. Choosing Rapid Beat 3 removes the player's access to the auto combo normal, which is essential for both combo routing and block strings. Again, the game system is punishing players for trying to interact with it, and proper feedback is not being provided to allow players to comfortably use Rapid Beat. I hope this demonstrates to you how complicated creating an auto combo system actually is, and how games like Persona 4 Arena or BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle were able to implement systems that felt natural to use. In these instances, HCI is invisible and therefore succeeds. Moon skills are next. They work as tiny EX moves, better than the mirrorless versions, but often having different properties than the EX version of the moves. Their use of usage and non-intuitive way to punish them can carry beginners through a match. However, this system directly contradicts a lot of the game's core principles. Like I said, moon skills are another beginner's trap, although less critical than Rapid Beat. Moon skills obstruct beginners' ability to learn Lumina's system mechanics, since the moon gauge is required for moon drive, and having low moon gauge can make shield much worse. Moon skills implementation hampers new players from progressing due to their overwhelming presence of both offense and defense. Finally, shield. It was the most criticized mechanic in Lumina. It's a sort of parry with different follow-ups, but the catch is that low parry in 1.0 beats low and mid attacks, while high beats overhead and mids. This meant that low shield was both a low risk and high reward on top of freezing the screen constantly, which disoriented players. Lumina's shield tried to tone down the skill required from C and F moon shields from Actress again, and tried to give beginners a way to counterattack. Unfortunately, its implementation centralized the game in its infancy. Melty veterans were now being punished for putting gaps in their pressure, a very common technique in Actress again, and newcomers had their first impression that the game was glorified rock paper scissors. To this day, fighting game casuals would say that Type Lumina is a random game when the shield was addressed 4 years ago and continue to get nerfed with each patch. For example, shielding a B follow-up guarantees a punish, overall damage of shield was being reduced significantly, and you can now break low shield with B and C attacks, which will take a big portion of the opponent's moon gauge and do some chip damage. With this example in mind, let's discuss Street Fighter 6 real accessibility features: Drive Impact, Drive Rush, and Throw Loops.
He doesn't mind throws.
Most of you are a little confused about the last sentence, but let me explain. The genius of Street Fighter 6 is the fact that its main gameplay mechanics allow beginners to quickly grasp the point of the game and start having fun, perhaps a little too well. In the previous example, Melty Blood's new mechanics were aimed at beginners and low to mid-level players, but despite their inclusion, low-level players could not touch a skilled opponent. Street Fighter 6 HCI developers realized that at least having the illusion of winning and the path to that victory are very important to the player. If a beginner is getting steamrolled and cannot start offense, the game will be disheartening to learn, and they may end up shelving the game before making any progress. But to solve this, the team prepared a couple of accessibility features. The first two, which we briefly discussed, that allow for even inexperienced players to interact with the game on the basic level and even punch well above their weight. In short, the accessibility features in most fighting games have not fixed the fundamental problems lowering the skill ceiling. Ever since Persona 4 Arena popularized auto combos, fighting games have been stuck in a cycle where they get simpler, yet skill gaps are widened because top players have the same tools. Capcom saw this and began working on a system to address the skill ceiling so that players can interact with the system at a very basic level and still be somewhat effective. Let's go over these mechanics. Drive Impact is a mechanic that starts as a headache, turns into a bad option, and then is mostly a specific punisher and mental stack overwhelmer at high level. This mechanic is the most Type Lumina of the bunch, in the sense that it is quite annoying for beginners and plagues low level play, so beginners have to learn how to deal with this mechanic to move on. The other two are more interesting case studies. Drive Rush is one of the most controversial tools in all of Street Fighter 6. It is a neutral disruptor, an amazing combo starter, a combo extender, and a pressure tool. It is a powerful option that can be performed easily with a simple macro. Low forward into Drive Rush is a very potent tool that most of the roster has access to. Drive Rush is absurd when you think about it. The tool allows players to get a point blank strike through mix-up for a resource that you have at the very beginning of the game. The only other game I can think of with something like that is type Lumina, where you start with a full moon gauge. However, moon skills do not even come close to its power level and versatility, especially for what is required from the player to make them work.
Dude, late drive rush overhead is the cheapest thing in this game.
Drive rush, while it is both annoying to counter and homogenizing, has become one of the main tools at helping beginners and people pick Street Fighter 6 up quickly. It's very simple to explain to someone, hey, just crouch, press medium kick, and press this button. On block or hit, you will get something out of it of value. Of course, drive rush is bound to the drive gauge, a resource one has to manage. When you're a beginner and you don't care about that, you can still use drive rush 2 to 3 times and feel like you are putting pressure into the opponent. The second piece of the puzzle is throw loops. Throw loops are generally considered to be the most annoying mechanic in SF6 and basically boils down to throwing over and over again, as this game lacks any throwing vulnerability, or going for a meaty or a throw bait. Baiting throws in SF6 gives you a massive reward for later execution. Keep that in mind. Throw loops are basically a guess, easy to enforce, easy to understand, and easy to execute. For most characters, it is a tool that evens the scales such that lower level players have the illusion of victory. When I say illusion, I mean that a lower level player could get a hit on an opponent with drive rush or a couple of throws and feel like they could have won the round. Or hell, maybe they do take a round, and maybe they could take a game. Since SF6 is such a volatile game, a couple of mistakes is all it takes to lose a round, and its volatility allows for inexperienced players to taste the thrill of chasing down higher level opponents without putting in much effort. While very frustrating at a high level, these mechanics open the gate for beginners to interact with fighting games beyond a surface level. Since these systems allow for users of all experience levels to better understand the game, they are called accessibility tools. Implementations such as drive rush help users interact with the actual game loop beyond giving players their basic character moveset. Think of motor controls as me giving you MS Paint, but I remove all the icons and just tell you to press around without any direction. Now think of the system mechanics of this game as the icons with instructions of what they do and clear feedback once you press the buttons. I bet most of you have gone through SF6 without really thinking of how intuitive it feels to press buttons into drive rush, going through a mix-up or combo that puts the opponent in the corner, and then you take control with a throw loop. I think the system is as seamless as it can be, since players can seamlessly interact with the game in the way that developers intended. I say this with the utmost admiration. As an HCI student myself, I know how difficult it is to create software that is easy to understand and requires a very small learning curve. This dichotomy is the big distinction between Street Fighter 6 and other games' accessibility features. Street Fighter 6 was created with the idea that anyone could beat anyone else, and that is why throw loops and drive rush have remained basically untouched throughout SF6's almost 3-year lifespan. Removing or nerfing either would make it so that lower level players will lose the one mechanic that is allowing them to have fun with the game, which is probably not the correct choice as the game is easily doing the best out of the current fighting games on the market. Any way you slice it, Street Fighter 6's most controversial mechanics are also the reason the game is successful. Of course, creating a system where you are basically giving the tools to anyone can have drawbacks. It is remarkably simple to demolish another player, and as some people have described it, it is clear that they prioritize making the game as simple as possible so that these tools could work for new players. Some people have called this decision scrubby, although it removes the skill required to excel at fighting games.
メナはスト6は大味な印象ってツイートしてた。まあ、あえてだと思うんだけどね、開発者の意図として。大味にしないと新規が入ってこれないでしょっていうことだと思うんだ。
I want to circle back to Melty type Lumina and compare just how the gameplay loop works for both games. In Melty type Lumina, the main goal of the game is to land combos. These vary in difficulty based on character, starter, and resources, but most of the cast wants to end a combo with a metered ender or an earth throw after a metered ender. EX moves do a great damage at most points in a combo and unlock potent mix-ups for almost every character. You also get Moon Gauge, your second resource, which is extremely important. Unlike SF6, this is a meter that you need to gain throughout the match and manage accordingly. Instead of it passively filling throughout the round, you need to change your routing and game plan if you lack Moon Gauge. This is giving us two barriers of entry. First, you need to be able to land combos, which while many are relatively easy, you still need to study and learn the character's special moves and jump cancel routes. You also need to manage your meter to use your enders. Basically, you're not able to interact with the game the developers intended unless you at least somewhat understand these concepts. In SF6, you start with full drive meter. Drive meter is obviously a resource that you need to manage, but a beginner can start interacting with the system, land mix-ups and combos with the basic knowledge of a cancel. Basically, in order to interact with the system the developers intended, you only need to understand very basic concepts. The second part is combos. SF6's combo system is relatively simple, with most characters having short combos that tend to be straightforward to execute. There are obvious exceptions, but most beginner characters behave like this. If we compare both systems directly, Street Fighter 6 is way more accessible, easier to understand, and easier to use for fledgling players. It will be interesting to see if new games will create systems with some of these concepts in mind. While I do believe potent accessibility tools are a huge part of why Street Fighter 6 retains so many people, overwhelming accessibility tools can severely damage a game's reputation at a high level, exemplified by the frequent complaints players have about drivers and throw loops in Street Fighter 6. Hopefully I was able to explain a little bit of how complex it is to create a game and how thoughtful the developers at Capcom were while developing the newest Street Fighter game. Also, a huge shout out to Kikoho, who's the reason my script sounded the way it did. Thank you so much for reviewing and for your work. You all have a great one.